What if your entire life was judged by a line of code? You submit your rental application, you make the income, you have no criminal record. You've never missed a payment in your life. You're ready to move in, ready to sign, ready to start fresh. But then, rejected. No explanation, no contact, no one to talk to. Just a cold denial from a faceless digital gatekeeper. An AI screening tool decided you're too risky to rent, so now you're homeless. This is not science fiction. This is the new normal for millions of renters in America. Landlords across the country, especially corporate property managers, now rely on automated decision systems to evaluate tenants. These algorithms crunch your background, credit score, employment history, rental history, even social media activity, and spit out a yes or a no. No human review, no chance to appeal, no knowledge of what factors flagged you. And if you're poor, black, disabled, undocumented, or even just unlucky, the algorithm almost always says no. You don't get a second chance. You don't even get a first one. Because in today's housing market, data decides your dignity. It doesn't matter if the data is wrong. It doesn't matter if you're stable, responsible, or desperate. If the algorithm marks you red, you're locked out, sometimes literally. In this episode of System Fails, we expose how automated housing decisions are quietly punishing vulnerable Americans without oversight, transparency, or recourse. No judges, no juries, just code. And when the system fails, no one takes the blame because there's no one left in charge. Let's pull back the curtain. Alicia Torres was doing everything right. She had a full-time job as a medical assistant in Phoenix. She made $48,000 a year. She had 2 young sons, perfect attendance at school. No criminal record, no evictions, no missed payments. When her lease ended in early 2023, her landlord sold the building to a private equity firm. They raised the rent by $600 a month, well beyond what Alicia could afford. So she started looking elsewhere. That's when her nightmare began. She applied to over 20 different apartment complexes in the metro area. Every one of them, owned or managed by a large corporate landlord, used automated tenant screening software. And every one of them denied her. Not because of her income, not because of bad behavior, but because the algorithm said no. She never received a reason. No one would return her calls. One leasing agent whispered off the record, "It's the system. If it flags you, there's nothing we can do." Alicia requested a copy of her tenant report under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. When it finally arrived weeks later, it was riddled with errors. A past eviction that never happened. A collection account that was already resolved. A wrong address linked to her name from a city she never lived in. She submitted dispute forms, waited. Nothing changed. Meanwhile, her lease expired. Her landlord wouldn't renew. She and her boys moved into a motel, $90 a night. No kitchen, no space, no dignity. Her son stopped inviting friends over. Alicia started taking double shifts just to keep the room. She tried applying again, this time with a co-signer. Still rejected. Because the system only knew what the data said, and the data was wrong. At one point, she considered falsifying her information just to get through. But even then, the risk of being caught meant losing everything. "I did what they said you're supposed to do," Alicia told a local reporter months later. "I work, I save, I don't break laws, and somehow a machine gets to decide my kids don't deserve a home." Alicia isn't alone. Thousands, maybe millions of renters across the U.S. have been blacklisted by housing algorithms, sometimes because of outdated data, sometimes because of shared names, sometimes for reasons that the companies won't even disclose. In one class action lawsuit filed in 2022, plaintiffs alleged that a major tenant screening company routinely mixed up people with similar names, assigning criminal records or eviction notices to the wrong individuals. In some cases, it took years to fix the mistake, but for Alicia, time ran out. She lived in that motel for 6 months. Her boys missed birthdays, stability, sleep. She finally found housing, but only after pleading with a small, independent landlord who agreed to ignore the algorithm and meet her in person. That landlord said she was exactly the kind of tenant I wanted. But most landlords don't meet you anymore. They let the system decide. Up next, we break down that system, where the algorithms come from, who builds them, who profits, and why no one is ever held accountable, even when they get it wrong. Let's break it down. When you apply to rent an apartment, you might think a leasing agent is looking at your application, reading your income, checking your references, maybe giving you a call. But more and more, that job is done by software. Tenant screening algorithms like RealPage's AI screening, CoreLogic's Safe Rent, RentGrow, and TransUnion's SmartMove are now used by thousands of landlords across the U.S., especially large property management firms. These tools were built to streamline the process. They promise to evaluate risk, flag bad tenants, and save time. But how do they actually work? The answer: you don't know. No one outside the company does. These systems are considered proprietary, meaning their formulas are secret, protected as intellectual property. Not even the landlords using them can see exactly how decisions are made. But here's what we do know. Most tenant screening tools use a combination of credit history, rental history, including prior evictions or missed rent, criminal records, employment verification, debt-to-income ratio, court records, previous addresses, sometimes even public social media activity. Some systems also score you based on patterns they've learned from prior applicants, patterns that reflect deeply embedded social and racial biases. If people with your profile were flagged before, you'll be flagged too, even if you've never made a mistake in your life. It's not just about what's true. It's about what's in the data. And that data is often wrong. A 2020 study by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, CFPB, found that nearly 1 in 5 consumer background reports contain material errors. In the housing sector, the rate is even higher due to poor matching, outdated information, and lack of cross-checking. One of the most notorious problems? Name conflation. If your name is John Smith and another John Smith got evicted in another state, guess what? You just got flagged. The systems don't always verify birth dates, SSNs, or full legal records. And when errors happen, it's up to you to catch and fix them. But most renters never even see the report that rejected them. Worse, there's no human oversight. In most cases, leasing agents don't review rejections. They trust the software. Some even turn off their phones once the algorithm denies someone. And if you call the screening company, good luck. They'll ask you to file a dispute. Wait 30 days, maybe longer. Meanwhile, you're homeless. Now, let's talk power. These screening tools aren't neutral. They're part of a broader industry. Companies like RealPage and CoreLogic don't just provide screening. They also offer pricing software, rental analytics, and even automated eviction processing. That means the same companies that tell landlords who not to rent to also tell them how high to raise the rent and help them kick out tenants faster. It's a vertical monopoly. Data, decision, and enforcement, all under one corporate roof. And who suffers? The people without perfect records. The people living paycheck to paycheck. The people whose data trails don't fit the algorithm's definition of safe. This isn't about efficiency. It's about control. When decisions about your housing are made by machines and no one can explain them, you lose not just access. You lose your right to challenge injustice. And worst of all, there's no one to sue. When a company denies you housing based on an algorithm, you can't confront the person who made the call, because there was no person. The machine made the decision. The landlord trusted it. The company that built it says it's protected. And you're just another data point. Alicia's story is tragic, But it's not unique. If anything, it's disturbingly common. Because when algorithms are trained on biased data, they don't erase inequality. They automate it. Let's talk about who gets hurt the most. Black and brown renters. Tenant screening algorithms often rely on criminal and eviction records, two systems that are already deeply racialized. Black Americans are twice as likely to face eviction, more than 5x as likely to be incarcerated, more likely to have inaccurate or incomplete records due to systemic over-policing and court inefficiencies. So when an algorithm factors in criminal history or prior eviction risk, it's pulling from skewed datasets, even when the charges were dropped, even when the eviction was illegal, even when the person was never convicted. The system doesn't care. It sees a flag, and that flag gets you rejected. A study from the Urban Institute showed that Black and Latino renters were denied by automated screening tools at significantly higher rates, even when their income and credit matched white applicants. Single mothers. Women, especially single moms, face unique housing barriers. They often have inconsistent income due to caregiving duties. They may live in multi-generational households. They might have non-traditional work like gig jobs or under-the-table wages. The algorithm doesn't see the context. It sees risk. One mother in Texas was flagged because she had 2 short gaps in employment. Her income was solid. Her rental history was perfect. But the AI flagged instability, and the apartment denied her. She and her 3 children ended up in a shelter. People with disabilities. Many disabled renters live on fixed incomes, often Social Security Disability Insurance, SSDI, or Supplemental Security Income, SSI. These don't always show up cleanly in credit checks or income verification systems. One blind man in California was denied because the software couldn't verify consistent income, even though he had received SSDI for 12 years straight. He had no idea what happened until an advocacy group investigated. Undocumented immigrants. Automated systems often require a Social Security number, formal credit report, or proof of U.S. income. If you're undocumented, or if your immigration status is in process, you may not have those records. That means you're automatically excluded, even if you've lived here for years, paid rent on time, and worked consistently. One DACA recipient was rejected from 4 different buildings, despite having letters of employment and glowing references, because the screening software couldn't verify identity. Survivors of domestic violence. Many survivors of abuse have disrupted rental or credit histories. They may have fled in the middle of a lease. Their abuser may have ruined their credit or opened accounts in their name. When an algorithm sees a broken lease or poor score, it assumes the worst. But what if it actually meant they were trying to stay alive? Some survivors even end up on tenant blacklists because of evictions filed by their abuser, who was also the leaseholder. Formerly homeless individuals. Many programs try to transition people out of shelters or transitional housing. But if you've ever had an eviction, lived in a motel, or lacked consistent income, your file is marked. The AI doesn't see that you've rebuilt your life. It sees you as a bad risk. One non-profit in Chicago said they had 11 clients, all with clean criminal records, steady jobs, and caseworker support, rejected by AI screening in the same week. These are the people algorithms fail most. Those whose stories don't fit a spreadsheet. Those whose survival has left scars on their records, on their credit, on their data. When the system only sees numbers, people get erased. And when housing is filtered through machines, the most vulnerable get locked out first and hardest. But these are also the people who most desperately need stability. A safe home, a permanent address, a chance to rebuild. The algorithm doesn't care. But we should. For years, people like Alicia were rejected, evicted, and erased, without ever knowing who or what made the decision, but in recent years, the pushback has begun. The lawsuits. In 2022, a class action lawsuit was filed in New York against a major tenant screening company, alleging widespread violations of the Fair Credit Reporting Act. The claim that the company's software mislabeled people as evicted when they weren't, flagged individuals with common names using someone else's record, failed to give applicants proper notice or opportunity to correct errors. One plaintiff, a Navy veteran, had been living out of his car for 6 months after being denied housing based on an eviction that wasn't his. The algorithm had matched him to someone else with a similar name, and no one corrected it. The lawsuit is ongoing, but it sparked a national conversation. Should algorithms be allowed to make life-altering decisions in secret? The legislation. Some lawmakers are starting to notice. In 2023, Colorado passed a bill requiring landlords who use automated screening tools to disclose the name of the service, share adverse decisions, and provide instructions on how to dispute errors. In California, a proposed bill would ban the use of opaque automated tenant screening tools unless companies could prove the system was fair, transparent, and correctable. New York, Illinois, and Washington are exploring similar measures. And at the federal level, the Algorithmic Accountability Act, though stalled, aims to force companies to audit their AI tools for bias and discrimination. It's not enough, but it's a start. The advocates. Across the country, tenant rights groups are taking matters into their own hands. Organizations like National Housing Law Project, the Legal Aid Society, Just Fix NYC, Upturn, Code for America, are working to expose how algorithmic housing decisions replicate and amplify existing inequalities. They offer legal help to renters rejected by AI, tools for checking and correcting tenant records, pressure campaigns on corporate landlords to adopt human-in-the-loop review systems. Some are pushing for a tenant's algorithmic Bill of Rights, which would guarantee every renter the right to know how they're being evaluated, the right to appeal a decision, the right to human review, the right to correct false data, because technology without accountability is just oppression with a silicone face. The victories. They're rare, but they exist. In 2021, a woman in Oregon sued after being wrongly flagged by a rental screening system. Her victory forced the company to change its matching algorithm and pay damages. In Minneapolis, a coalition of renters convinced a major housing company to stop using automated rejection tools altogether and return to personal screening for borderline applicants. Some cities, like San Francisco, now fund public programs to help renters review and dispute their digital tenant files. These wins are small, but they matter. Because every system that fails can also be fixed. The resistance is growing, but it's still David versus Goliath, with Goliath backed by venture capital and lobbying firms. The question now is whether the law can catch up to the code before more lives are destroyed by mistakes no one will admit were made. Let's take a step back. Why would we let a machine decide who gets a home? The answer is unsettling, because in many ways, the system was designed to prefer it that way. Efficiency over empathy. Landlords, especially large corporate owners, aren't looking to get to know you. They're not trying to build community. They're trying to maximize return on investment properties. To them, a tenant is not a person, it's a risk profile. And the more human decision-making you include, the more time, training, and liability it takes. That means slower approvals, higher costs, and greater exposure to discrimination lawsuits. So what's the solution? Remove the human, add the algorithm. It's clean, it's fast, it never gets tired, it never gets sued, and it never feels guilty. This illusion of objectivity. Tech companies promised that AI would be fairer than humans. No prejudice, no bias, just math. But that's a myth. Algorithms are only as objective as the data we feed them. And America's data is soaked in decades of racism, redlining, over-policing, and economic exclusion. When you train a machine on that data, you don't erase injustice, you calcify it. The software isn't neutral, it's learned our worst patterns, then optimized them, and when the results harm people, tech companies say, it's the data, not us. Landlords say, it's the system, not us. And everyone walks away clean. The rise of the corporate landlord. 50 years ago, your landlord might have lived down the street. Now they're often a Wall Street firm with thousands of units across multiple states. They don't know your name. They don't care about your story. They want scalability, and algorithms make that possible. These firms are buying up homes, converting them into rentals, and automating every part of the process, from pricing to maintenance to leasing to eviction. It's housing run by spreadsheet, and in that model, the algorithm doesn't just make decisions. It becomes the landlord, the accountability void. In a traditional system, when something went wrong, you could blame someone. A manager, a clerk, a judge. Now, there's no one left. If you're denied housing, you're told, that's just what the system said. You can't cross-examine code. You can't subpoena a neural net. You can't ask a software to explain itself. So the injustice becomes invisible, even as it spreads. And worst of all, people begin to believe, if the system rejected me, I must be the problem. That's the most dangerous feature of algorithmic oppression. It makes discrimination feel like logic. What does this say about us? When we outsource moral decisions to machines, it's not because they're better at ethics, it's because we want distance from guilt. A leasing agent may feel conflicted turning away a single mother, but a software rejection? No sweat. It's not personal. It's just policy. It's just business. It's just tech. But it's not just anything, because for the person on the other end, it's everything. Their roof, their safety, their future. This is the world we've built. Hyper-efficient, emotionally detached, systemically biased, and protected by layers of plausible deniability. Until we face that, nothing will change. Alicia got lucky. After 6 months in a motel, she found one landlord, one human being, willing to look past the red flags and meet the woman behind the file. Most people don't. Most people never even find out why they were denied. Because when housing is decided by invisible systems, you stop being a person. You become a statistic, a liability, a number that doesn't quite fit, and the consequences are life-altering. Children growing up without stability, workers commuting from shelters, families splitting up for a place to sleep, entire communities displaced, not by force, but by code. This isn't an isolated glitch. It's a designed failure. A system built for convenience, scaled for profit, and shielded from accountability. But it doesn't have to be this way. What can be done? Transparency. Every applicant deserves to know how decisions are made and why they were denied. Appeals. People must have the right to correct false or misleading data and be heard by a human. Oversight. Companies using AI in housing must be held to civil rights standards, audited for bias, and made legally responsible for harm. Alternatives. Not every landlord needs to use automated systems. Many small housing providers still rely on personal references, interviews, and common sense. Legislation. Support local, state, and federal laws that demand fairness, explainability, and recourse in all algorithmic housing decisions. And you? If you're a landlord, don't hide behind the algorithm. Use tech as a tool, not as an excuse. If you're a renter, know your rights, request your report, challenge inaccuracies, connect with housing advocates. If you're a voter, ask your representatives what they're doing to stop digital discrimination in housing. And if you've been through this yourself, speak up. Your story might be the one that sparks change. Remember, algorithms don't see your struggle. They don't see your kids. They don't see your humanity. But we do. This system may be automated, but the resistance is still human. Let's build something better, together.